I took a solo camping trip in the fall of 2016. It was late October, just cold enough that most people were staying home, which was part of the reason I picked that time. I was 31 years old then. I'd just gone through a bad breakup, and I needed to get away from everything. My apartment in Kansas City, my office job, my phone. I wanted to be off the grid for a few days. I didn't even tell many people where I was going, just that I'd be out of town and wouldn't have service. I packed light, just my tent, some food, water jugs, a hand crank radio, a hunting knife, my sleeping bag, and a solar charger for emergencies. I decided on a spot I'd found a few years before while hiking through the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri. It was deep in the woods, past the more popular trails. I remembered finding a small clearing near a stream, a perfect place to pitch a tent without being disturbed. No cars nearby, no hikers, nothing. Just trees and quiet. I parked my truck at a little gravel pull-off near an old forest access road that had long been closed to vehicles. I loaded up my gear and hiked for almost 2 hours to reach the clearing. It felt good to sweat, to feel the pack digging into my shoulders and my boots grinding into the dirt and leaves. That afternoon light slanting through the orange and yellow trees, the sound of wind nudging the canopy. It calmed me. By late afternoon, I had my tent set up near the stream. I gathered some dead wood, started a small fire, and ate some beef jerky and a couple apples. The sun dipped low fast, and the air cooled quickly. I layered up, tightened my boots, and sat close to the fire until the stars started to show. There was no sound but the wind and the water. That first night, I slept deep, the kind of sleep you can only get after a long hike and a cold evening. I didn't even stir once. When I woke the next morning, the tent was a little wet from dew, and I could see my breath in the air. I boiled some water for coffee on a small metal burner, sat by the stream with my mug, and watched a deer across the water walk quietly through the brush. Around midday, I hiked a little deeper into the woods without my pack. I took a small notebook and pen, and I wrote down anything that came to mind. I'd always wanted to try writing outdoors, and this was my chance. I found a ridge a mile or so south with a clear view through the trees and sat there for an hour. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything unusual, just birds and wind. But when I returned to my tent that afternoon, something was wrong. I noticed it right away. One of my water jugs had been moved. It had been resting upright near a flat rock, but now it was tipped on its side, a few feet away, like it had rolled or been kicked. I stood there for a second, unsure. I didn't remember leaving it like that, and the wind hadn't been strong enough to knock it over. I checked my bag. My food was untouched, nothing missing. The tent flap was closed, just how I left it. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a coyote. I even looked for tracks, but the leaves were too thick to make anything out. Still, it bothered me. That night, I built the fire bigger than before. I kept the hunting knife closer to my sleeping bag. I listened harder to the sounds of the woods. Every crack of a branch felt louder than it should have been. I didn't sleep as well. I woke up twice, heart pounding, unsure what stirred me. Once, I could have sworn I heard breathing outside the tent, just for a few seconds. But when I strained to listen, it was gone. Just the wind again. The next morning, I told myself I was being paranoid. I had come out there to clear my head, and now I was letting shadows play tricks on me. I made breakfast, instant oatmeal and coffee, and forced myself to act like everything was normal. I sat by the stream again, but I kept checking over my shoulder. Around noon, I went to gather more firewood, farther this time, into a thicker part of the forest. I carried an empty canvas bag, snapping off long dead branches and dragging them back toward camp. On my second trip out, I saw something strange wedged into the base of a tree. It was a soda can, crushed, dirty, clearly old, but it hadn't been there before. I would have noticed it. It was right on the edge of the path I'd used a dozen times already. It wasn't just the can. It was where it was placed. Not tossed or littered, wedged firmly between two roots like someone had meant for it to be seen. The way you might mark a trail. I didn't touch it. Back at the camp, I didn't feel right. The woods felt heavier somehow. The silence wasn't calming anymore. It felt like something was holding its breath. Later that afternoon, I found more. About 20 yards behind my tent, I spotted a length of thin blue twine hanging from a low tree branch. It was tied in a perfect loop, like a noose. Not big, maybe 6 inches across, but it was tied too neatly to be accidental. And again, I'd walked that area the day before. I would have seen it. That night, I barely slept. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat in the dark inside my tent, the knife in my hand. Every few minutes I thought I heard movement. Footsteps far off, a twig snapping, the rustle of brush. But nothing ever came close. At some point after midnight, I heard something I couldn't ignore. A whistle. 2 short blasts, sharp and clear. Far off to the east. Then silence. My stomach turned to ice. I stayed frozen for almost an hour. Nothing followed the whistle.
No voices. No footsteps.
Just wind again. At dawn, I packed. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I rolled my sleeping bag tight, broke down the tent, and stuffed everything into the pack as fast as I could. I kept scanning the trees, waiting to see movement, someone watching. But I didn't. As I started the hike out, I kept off the main path. I didn't want to walk the same way I'd come in. I veered southwest, planning to cut back to the access road from another angle. I didn't want to take the risk that someone had marked where I'd been. 2 hours in, I found another soda can. This one was new, not crushed, clean, sitting right in the middle of a small rock outcrop like a marker. I pushed harder, hiking fast, ignoring the pain in my shoulders and legs. I could feel I was being watched. Not in the imaginary way, actually watched. I kept thinking I saw someone through the trees, just behind the branches. I started talking to myself under my breath, just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. Finally, I made it to the gravel pull-off. My truck was there, thank God, but there were tire tracks in the dirt next to it. Fresh ones. Mud churned up like someone had pulled in maybe the night before. I didn't wait to figure it out. I threw my gear in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. I peeled out of there, flying down the gravel road, fishtailing around the corners. I didn't calm down until I was 20 miles out, back on the main road, passing farms and gas stations again. Later that week, I told myself it could have been nothing, just coincidence, trash from old campers, hunters marking trails. But it didn't feel like that. It felt targeted, like someone had been following me, moving closer each day, watching how I reacted, how long I'd stay. I didn't report it. I didn't think I had enough to say. No crime, no face, just a whistle in the dark and signs someone had been close. But I haven't camped alone since. Every now and then, I'll still think about the sound of that whistle, 2 short notes. Not a bird, not wind, someone, somewhere out there, and they knew exactly where I was. My name is Ethan, and I'm 34. This happened 4 years ago, back in 2021, when I was going through a rough patch. I had just quit my job in Atlanta. Corporate stuff, soul-sucking routine, long meetings that went nowhere. I needed a break, not just from work, but from everything. People, phones, traffic, even the city's smell. So I packed up my Jeep Wrangler with a tent, sleeping bag, a cooler full of simple food, and a small stack of firewood. My plan was to disappear into the mountains of western North Carolina for a week. No cell service, no obligations. Just trees, wind, maybe some deer if I was lucky. I found a spot outside a tiny town called Robbinsville, near Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. You drive about an hour past town on a twisting, barely paved road, then another few miles on gravel. No official campsites, just scattered clearings where hunters or wanderers like me sometimes pitch tents. The kind of place where no one's gonna check on you unless they're lost or looking for something. My spot was beside a stream that ran cold and fast over smooth rocks. Dense forest on 3 sides, an open hill behind me, and no signs of other people. No wrappers, no tire tracks, nothing. That first night, I built a small fire and sat listening to the rush of the stream. It was cool enough to wear a sweatshirt but not freezing. I brought a journal, so I wrote a few pages, trying to clear my head. I cooked a couple of hot dogs on a metal stick, then crawled into my tent around 10. The night was calm, just frogs and rustling leaves. I woke up once to pee and noticed the moon was so bright I could see my shadow. The forest around me looked silver and still. It was perfect, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The next day I hiked a little, maybe 3 miles upstream, nothing crazy. I didn't see anyone. I found some deer tracks, a pile of scat that was probably from a black bear, but no real danger. I came back around 4 p.m., sweaty and tired, and took a quick dip in the stream. It was freezing, but it felt good. I made a small fire again, read for a while, then turned in a little earlier. That night something woke me around 3 a.m. It wasn't loud. No growl, no branches breaking. It was the kind of noise that doesn't belong out there, soft, quick, careful. The sound of movement, but from something upright. Not a deer stepping heavily. More like a person walking without wanting to be heard. I laid there, still, my sleeping bag zipped up around me. I tried to tell myself it was just a raccoon or a fox, but it went quiet for a long time, and then I heard the sound again, closer this time, maybe 20 feet from the tent just past the fire pit. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The fire had died out hours ago, so it was pitch black. My headlamp was by my feet, and I didn't want to make noise grabbing it. I just laid there, eyes open, staring into the dark fabric of the tent ceiling. Eventually, the sound stopped. I stayed still for what felt like an hour. When I finally fell back asleep, it was already getting light. The birds were starting up, and the cold had settled in. That morning I got out and checked around the site. Nothing.
No boot prints, no cigarette boots, no trash.
The dirt around the tent was undisturbed. Maybe I'd imagined it. I was tired, after all, and my mind had been spinning for weeks before I even left home. Maybe it was just the woods messing with my head. Still, I didn't feel comfortable hiking far that day. I stuck close to camp, sat by the water, made some instant coffee, and read. But I kept looking into the trees more than I wanted to. I kept my knife on me. I even put my little camp axe in the tent that night just in case. That third night was quiet again.
No sounds.
No movement. I figured whatever I heard, it was just some animal passing through. I had food out after all. Maybe it had smelled something. Still, I didn't sleep well. By day 4, I was restless. I needed a hike to burn off the nerves. I followed a ridgeline path that climbed a few hundred feet above my camp, giving me a wide view of the surrounding valleys. From up there, the forest looked endless, and my camp was completely hidden by the tree canopy. No roads, no rooftops, no power lines. I liked that feeling, the feeling of being small. I stayed up there for a while before heading back. It was around 6 p.m. when I got back to camp, and something was wrong. I knew it before I stepped into the clearing. The air felt off, like when you walk into a room where 2 people were just arguing. My tent was there, still zipped, still upright. My cooler was closed. Nothing obvious, but the firewood I'd stacked neatly was kicked over. Not scattered like an animal knocked it, just not how I left it. Then I noticed the rope. I'd left 20 feet of nylon rope wrapped around a low branch, planning to make a bear bag later. It was gone. Not on the branch, not on the ground. Just gone. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the ropeless branch. I checked everything else, my food, my sleeping bag, my gear. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just that weird pile of wood and the missing rope. I should have packed up then. I know that now, but something about being that deep in the woods, that far from anything, makes you stubborn. I told myself maybe the rope slipped off in the wind. Maybe I just forgot how I left the firewood. I stayed. I made another fire, ate, and went to bed. I didn't sleep. Every creak in the trees kept me awake. I gripped the axe under my sleeping bag, waiting for something to move, but nothing came. At first light, I made coffee, packed up some food, and started hiking out. I didn't want to leave yet, but I figured I'd drive into town, top off on gas, get a warm meal, maybe find a motel for the night and return the next day. I told myself a break would help clear my head. I hiked the 2 miles to where I'd parked, on a dirt patch under some tall pines, and stopped. There were boot prints in the mud. Not mine, not even close. Bigger than mine, spaced wider apart, and more than one set. At least 2 people had walked to my Jeep and stood near the back bumper. I hadn't parked on a trail or near anything popular. Whoever came up here, they came with a reason. Then I noticed the rear hatch was open. I ran the last few steps. The glass wasn't broken, the lock wasn't forced, but someone had gone through my stuff. My spare water was gone. So was the small box of protein bars I'd kept under the back seat. My jumper cables had been tossed aside. My old raincoat was gone too. That's when the adrenaline really kicked in. This wasn't my imagination. Someone had been watching me, tracking me, and now they knew where my car was. I slammed the hatch closed and jumped in. The Jeep started up fine. I turned around on the narrow gravel path and started driving back toward town. Fast. I kept checking the mirrors. Every time the trees opened, I scanned for movement. I didn't see anyone. It took over an hour to reach Robbinsville. When I hit pavement again, I realized my hands were shaking. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to be around other people. I pulled into a gas station and sat there in the lot for a long time before filling up. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? That I heard noises and lost a rope? That some water bottles were missing? There were no laws against being in the woods.
No cameras. No proof.
I ended up getting a motel room near the edge of town, one of those cheap ones with buzzing lights and thin walls. I stayed 2 nights, then drove home. I never went back to that spot. I still camp, but only in busier parks now, places with other tents in sight and rangers who check in. A year later, I read about a missing person case in that same county. A guy named Kyle from South Carolina who disappeared while hiking alone. His truck was found near the same forest. Never found his body. Just his empty campsite and tire tracks leading away from it that didn't match his. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe I was lucky. All I know is the woods didn't scare me. The silence didn't scare me. What scared me was that someone else was out there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who took their time watching. And if I hadn't left when I did, maybe I wouldn't be here to write this now. It was early October of 2012 when I decided to take a break from everything and head into the high desert canyons outside Farmington, New Mexico. I was 34 at the time, working as a subcontractor on a bunch of housing developments, and I had just wrapped up a 6-week job that left me drained. The kind of drained where it's not just your body, it's your head too. You walk around in a fog and forget what you opened the fridge for. I needed air, stillness, and dirt. That's how I ended up driving 2 hours out of town with the back of my pickup stuffed with gear and a cooler of food. I wasn't new to solo camping. I actually preferred it most of the time. I grew up in this part of New Mexico, and I knew how to handle myself out there. I always packed smart, plenty of water, extra food, a first aid kit, a map, and even a handheld emergency radio in case things went sideways. I had a 9mm tucked into the center console, not because I expected trouble, but because that's how I was raised. You just never know. I picked a spot I hadn't been to in years, a canyon near the Bisty Badlands, quiet and removed from the usual foot traffic. It wasn't an official campsite, no fire pits, no outhouses, just BLM land you could use if you kept things clean. There was a dry wash that cut through the middle of the area, with some scattered juniper trees and sandstone cliffs framing the whole thing. You could hike for hours and not see another soul. I parked at the base of a shallow hill and hiked my gear in about half a mile, just far enough to lose sight of the road. I set up camp near a cluster of big rocks that offered some shade and a bit of shelter from the wind. I pitched my tent facing the east, where the sun would hit it in the morning, and I dug a small fire ring using stones from around the wash. After I got the basics in place, I sat on a folding stool and just stared out into the nothing. It was beautiful, quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. That first night was uneventful, just how I like it. I grilled some hot dogs over the fire and ate them with mustard from a squeeze bottle. I had a cold beer from the cooler, watched the stars pop out one by one, then crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out. Coyotes howled in the distance around midnight, but that's normal for the area. I didn't even bother unzipping the tent to listen. I knew their song by heart. The weird stuff started on the second night. I had spent most of the day hiking a dry trail that looped up into a slot canyon and spit you out near an old sandstone arch. The sky had been that cloudless, brittle blue that only happens in the high desert. I didn't see anyone the whole time, just the tracks of a jackrabbit, a hawk circling above, and a couple of scorpions scuttling in the shade of rocks. When I made it back to camp around 5, the sun was already low, and the wind had picked up. Something felt off when I got back. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. My gear was exactly where I'd left it. Tent zipped, cooler latched, folding chair flipped down on its side like I'd done that morning. But the silence had changed. It was thicker, still but not peaceful, like something holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just tired. I boiled some water for dehydrated chili, ate it with a plastic spoon, then tossed the pouch into the trash bag I'd strung between 2 sticks. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, the cold set in quick. I threw on a thermal and started a fire, crackled and popped like it should, but even that sound felt like it didn't belong. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Nothing there, just the shadows creeping longer. By 9, the fire had burned low, and I was nodding off in my chair. I didn't want to sleep outside, so I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay there for a long time, listening. The wind had died down completely, which usually meant colder temperatures overnight. But there was something else. Footsteps. They weren't heavy, more like crunching twigs and shifting pebbles. Not constant either. They would come in short bursts, stop for a minute or two, then start again. At first, I figured it might be a deer. They're not uncommon around those parts, especially in the fall. But these steps didn't sound right. They were too careful, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The fire was just embers. Nothing moved. I scanned the area with the beam. My eyes caught something near the edge of the rocks. A shape just low enough to the ground that it didn't match anything natural. I froze. It looked like a man crouched low, but his posture was wrong. His limbs were too long, elbows higher than they should have been, like a spider that stood on its back legs. His head snapped toward me before I even finished the thought, and I ducked back inside the tent, heart slamming against my ribs. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, clutching my flashlight in one hand and my pistol in the other. No more sounds came. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just shadows playing tricks or a stray coyote moving weird. When I finally fell asleep, it was because exhaustion dragged me under. The next morning, I found prints near the edge of camp. Not boot prints, bare feet, human but too large. Each toe visible in the fine dust, the heel slightly deeper than it should have been, like whoever left them was carrying weight on their back or didn't walk quite right. I thought about packing up then and there, but I had one more night before I planned to leave, and a part of me didn't want to give in to what could have just been nerves. I spent the day close to camp, keeping the fire going and sticking near the rocks where I could see in every direction. I didn't hike. I didn't wander. I just stayed put. When night came, I built the fire bigger than before. I dragged some extra wood into the ring and lit it early. I even made a torch by wrapping a torn rag around a stick and soaking it with fuel from my stove bottle. I had the pistol sitting right next to me now, loaded, safety off. The night passed slow, real slow. By 10, I started to hear the noises again. Steps, faint and spread out. I didn't bother with the flashlight this time. I just sat there and stared into the dark, waiting. At one point, I saw movement beyond the wash. A figure, tall and thin, moved from one boulder to another. No sound, no hesitation, just smooth, slow motion. I stood up, raised the torch, and lit it with the fire. The flame bloomed fast, and I waved it above my head like a warning. That's when the sound changed. Something let out this low, guttural groan, not an animal sound. It had a rhythm to it, almost like language, but distorted and broken. It didn't sound angry or wild. It sounded curious, like someone practicing a word for the first time. I backed toward the tent, holding the torch in one hand and the pistol in the other. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. The figure never came close again. It stayed on the edge of the wash, pacing and crouching, always moving, but never fully entering the light. When dawn came, it was gone. I broke camp in record time, tossed everything into the pack, didn't bother folding the tent or dousing the fire. I just kicked sand over the embers and hiked back to the truck with my pistol still drawn. The air smelled different on the way out, metallic, sour. My skin itched the whole hike. When I reached the truck, I turned the key and floored it without looking back. The road was rough, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw for a long time, mostly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I still don't, but I've thought about it a lot over the years. I don't believe in skinwalkers in the way people tell stories. I don't believe in magic or shapeshifters or curses. What I believe is this: there are people out there who don't live by the rules we know. People who've learned how to move like animals, how to survive off-grid without being seen. Maybe they were born that way. Maybe they chose it. Doesn't matter. What matters is they're real. I don't go camping alone anymore. Haven't since that trip. I still love the desert. I still believe in the quiet. But I also believe in being watched. And once you know what that feels like, truly feels like, it never leaves you. I keep a laminated photo of those footprints in my toolbox. Just one shot I snapped with my phone before I packed up that last morning. I don't show it to anyone. I just keep it there to remind myself that the stories we hear as kids aren't always made up. Sometimes they're warnings, and sometimes they're right. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in western Montana. I had just turned 32, and things had been getting too noisy in my head. Work stress, apartment noise, the nonstop grind of city life in Boise. I needed silence. I needed to hear nothing but the wind through trees and water lapping at a shoreline. So I packed up my Ford Escape with a tent, sleeping gear, enough canned food and jerky to last 4 days, and my fishing rod. I left early on a Thursday morning and drove north through the mountain roads, turning off my phone once I passed Missoula. The spot I picked wasn't a designated campground. I found it 2 years earlier when hiking with a friend. It was a small clearing near Lake Ruth, about 3 miles from the nearest dirt road and surrounded by dense pine forest. The lake was mostly unknown except to a few locals and hunters. No cell service, no visitors, and no man-made sounds. I parked the SUV on the edge of the nearest trail, grabbed my backpack, and hiked in. The air was clear and cool, smelling like wet moss and pine needles. The sun cut through the tall trees, flashing gold as it hit the dirt path ahead of me. I reached the clearing around 11 a.m. The trees opened up to a flat, grassy patch a few dozen feet from the edge of the lake. The water shimmered blue, barely moving, except when the occasional trout jumped. I set up my tent at the far end of the clearing, where the ground was level and soft. I laid out my sleeping bag and gear inside, then stashed my food in a bear canister and hid it under a log about 30 feet away. I had brought a small gas stove, but I also built a fire pit with rocks just in case I felt like making a real fire. The first day was peaceful. I cast my fishing line out into the lake, caught 2 decent-sized trout, and cooked one up for dinner on the stove. I sat on a folding stool near the water and watched the sunset turn the lake orange and purple. Felt good to be away. That night, I lay in my tent with the fly open, watching the stars blink into view one by one. No city lights, no engine noise, no voices. Just me, my breath, and the forest. I woke up once in the night, around 2 a.m., to the sound of branches cracking in the woods. It wasn't alarming. Animals move at night, but it sounded heavier than a raccoon or deer. I lay still for a while, listening. Whatever it was, it moved slowly, branches snapping one at a time. Not like a bear rummaging for food, but more like deliberate steps. Eventually, the sound faded. I told myself it was probably a moose or maybe just a few loose branches falling from the wind. I didn't hear anything else until the birds started up just before dawn. The second day, I hiked the trails around the lake. I brought my compass and a small map I had drawn from my last trip. I walked around the west side of the lake, where thick trees and undergrowth made the going slow. I saw a fox dart through the brush, a hawk overhead, and some fresh deer prints near a muddy bank. It was perfect, exactly what I wanted. I took my time getting back, returning to camp around 3 p.m. I noticed a few things were different when I got back. My firewood pile had been knocked over. Nothing was missing, and it didn't look like anything had been chewed, just scattered. I thought maybe an animal had messed with it. I checked the bear canister, still there, still sealed. But the log I had covered it with had rolled a bit farther than I remembered. That was strange. I brushed it off. Probably some strong gusts or maybe a curious raccoon. I cleaned up, made some soup, and sat by the water again. I didn't fish that evening, just watched the surface and listened. But the silence didn't feel the same. There was a pressure to it, like something was holding its breath. That night, I didn't sleep as soundly. I kept hearing noises, sticks snapping, light rustling through the dry pine needles. Once I heard what sounded like a soft footstep just outside my tent. I held my breath and stared up at the tent ceiling. I didn't move, didn't sit up, just waited. After a while, it went quiet again. When I finally drifted off, it was nearly dawn. On the third morning, I woke up with a weird feeling. I unzipped the tent and saw something that stopped me cold. About 20 feet from the tent, at the edge of the clearing, a tree had deep knife marks in its bark. For vertical slashes, uneven but deliberate, fresh. I had a gut reaction, that sharp cold punch in the stomach. No animal did that. I walked over, crouched, and looked closer. It was made with a blade. A knife, maybe a machete. Not super clean cuts, but definite human marks. I looked around the clearing. Everything else seemed normal. My gear was untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But I knew someone had been there. Maybe while I was out hiking the day before. Maybe while I was sleeping. I took my knife from my pack and kept it in my pocket. I kept looking into the woods. expecting to see someone standing there. But the trees gave nothing back. Still and quiet. I thought about leaving right then, packing everything up and hiking back to the car. But it was a long hike, and it would take time to get to the nearest town. Part of me felt like I was overreacting. Maybe a hunter came through and marked the tree for some reason. Maybe it was old and I just hadn't noticed it before. I told myself that. I forced myself to stay calm. That day I stayed close to camp. Didn't hike, just gathered more firewood and kept a close eye on the treeline. I didn't fish. I didn't sit by the water. I didn't want to turn my back to the woods. I cooked quickly and cleaned up everything afterward. I even dug a small trench around the tent, just in case it rained. Anything to stay busy. That night was the worst. I lay awake in the tent, knife in hand, flashlight next to me. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft footfalls in the leaves. Not an animal, not a bear. Too light, but too steady to be random. I held my breath and listened. The steps came closer, stopped. Then I heard something zip, like a zipper. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the flashlight and knife and sat up. I didn't turn the light on yet. I just waited, ears straining. No more sounds. Minutes passed. Then, finally, I heard a faint rustling near where the bear canister was. Then silence again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat up, barely blinking, waiting for something else. Nothing came. When the sun started to rise, I crawled out and walked around the site. The bear canister was there, but it had been moved again, about 10 feet away from where I had left it. Still sealed, but it was clear someone had tried to open it. There were fresh scuff marks on it, like it had been handled roughly. And then I saw the footprints. Not boots, not hiking shoes, bare feet, human, adult-sized, slightly dirty, pressed into the soft dirt near the edge of the woods. That was enough. I packed everything as fast as I could. Tent, sleeping bag, gear, all of it. I didn't care about organizing or weight balance. I just threw it in the pack, grabbed the canister, and started moving. I didn't eat. I didn't stop to fill my water bottle. I just walked. Fast. The trail back felt longer than 3 miles. Every noise made my head snap around. Every squirrel, every breeze in the trees. I expected to see someone behind me every time I looked back. But no one was there. When I finally saw the SUV, parked and half covered in pine needles, I almost broke into a run. I tossed my gear in the back, locked the doors, and started the engine. The road out was rough, full of switchbacks and potholes, but I didn't care. I drove fast. By the time I hit cell service again, I had 15 missed notifications and a full battery. I didn't check any of them. I just kept driving. I didn't report anything. Who would I report it to? I wasn't on a marked campsite. No one saw anything. I had no proof, just a few footprints and some carved bark. I told myself it was a squatter or a drifter, maybe a hunter who got too close. But the truth is, someone was watching me out there. Someone who got close to my camp while I slept. Someone who didn't leave any gear, any sound, any trail. Just marks, just silence. I haven't been camping alone since. Sometimes I still think about those nights. The way the air felt too still. The way I felt like I was being watched. I've camped with friends since then, near towns, near other people. But never alone. Never again. I still love the woods. I still love the quiet. But now I know that quiet can hide things. Things that don't make noise when they move. Things that stand just outside the edge of the firelight. That trip changed the way I look at solitude. It reminded me that we're not the only ones who like to be alone out there. And some people, whoever they are, aren't just passing through. They're watching, waiting, and they don't make a sound. It was the end of September in 2019, and the days were just starting to feel shorter. My wife, Megan, and I had been talking for a while about getting away from the city for a weekend. Just the two of us, no phones, no work. We both worked in software, long days, late nights, too many screens. Megan found this place online. A small, forested park area about 3 hours out of Boise, Idaho. It wasn't a big national park or anything. Just a quiet forest area with a few official campsites along a dirt road that barely showed up on Google Maps. She liked that it wasn't crowded. I liked that it was cheap. We left early on a Friday morning. Our SUV was packed tight with everything: tent, sleeping bags, a small camping stove, canned food, flashlights, even bear spray. We weren't totally new to camping, but we weren't seasoned experts either. We'd done a few weekend trips over the years, but nothing off the grid like this. The idea of not having any cell service felt like a relief. The drive was easy for the first 2 hours, just highways and scenic roads. The last hour, though, was bumpy. Once we hit the dirt road, the trees got thicker, and we barely saw another car. Megan was watching the GPS closely, but even that started to lag. Eventually, we passed a faded wooden sign that just said, Mill Creek Camp, in chipping white paint. That was our place. There were only 4 or 5 actual campsites in the area, all spaced out pretty far. Ours was tucked back near a slope, surrounded by tall pines and brush. You couldn't see the other campsites from where we were. That's exactly what Megan wanted: peace, quiet, space. We set up the tent quickly. It was already close to 4 by the time we got everything in place. The sun was filtering through the trees, and the forest had this calming sound to it, like a low hush. The breeze would pick up every now and then and make the pines whistle gently. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that kind of quiet until we were surrounded by it. That first evening was relaxing. We cooked a simple dinner, sat by the fire, and just unwound. The stars came out clear and sharp, and we fell asleep easily. No problems at all. The second day was when things started to feel off. It was small at first. Around mid-morning, we hiked one of the nearby trails. It wasn't marked, just a narrow footpath that cut through the brush and curved up toward a ridge. We went about 2 miles before turning back. On the way back down, we found what looked like a freshly snapped tree branch lying across the trail. Not that weird on its own, but it hadn't been there earlier when we passed through. It looked clean-cut, too, not wind-snapped, not rotting, like it had just been broken off and dropped. I shrugged it off. Megan did too. Still, we both felt a little more aware of the sounds around us after that. I started to notice how quiet everything was, like really quiet.
No birds, no rustling.
Just whined through the trees. That should have been peaceful, but it felt empty, like the woods were holding their breath. Back at camp, I noticed boot prints near our fire pit. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. They weren't ours. We had hiking shoes with a different tread. These were larger, heavier, and came from the direction opposite the trail. The dirt was soft enough that I could see where someone had stood for a bit before walking back the way they came. Megan thought maybe they were from someone else camping nearby, just wandering through. But we hadn't seen anyone. Not one person since we arrived. I even checked with the small registration box at the start of the park. No one else had signed in for the weekend. I didn't say anything to her about that part. I didn't want to make her nervous. We still had 1 night to go. That night, I didn't sleep well. It wasn't loud or stormy or anything like that. It was the opposite. I kept waking up because I thought I heard something move outside. Not walking or anything obvious, just small sounds, like something brushing against the outside of the tent or stepping carefully through the brush. I held my breath for a long time, waiting for whatever it was to go away. Eventually, I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. The next morning, we found something strange. Our camp chair, The fold-up one I had left by the fire pit was gone. Not knocked over, gone. We looked around, thinking maybe the wind blew it or something dragged it, but we couldn't find it. Not even drag marks. It wasn't far from the tent, and I'm a light sleeper. I didn't hear anything. Neither did Megan. That was the moment we both felt it, like something wasn't right. We decided to pack up early. I didn't say anything out loud, but I felt like we were being watched. It's hard to describe. Just this prickling in the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. Megan didn't argue. She packed fast. As I was loading up the last bag, I noticed something further into the woods, maybe 50 feet out from our campsite. There was a flash of color, something orange. I walked toward it slowly. It was the backrest from our camp chair. It had been torn off and tossed against a tree. Just that part. The metal frame was nowhere to be seen. No sign of animals.
No scratches.
Just like someone had taken it, removed the fabric, and left it there. That was enough for me. We left. The road out felt longer than the road in. Every tree felt like it was hiding someone. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I kept checking the rearview mirror for signs of movement behind us. Nothing. We got back to the main road around noon and stopped at a diner. There was this relief that hit both of us as soon as we stepped inside. Like we were safe again. It's weird how fast you can go from calm to on edge in a place like that. I didn't say much over lunch. Neither did Megan. Felt like we were trying to forget it already. Back home, I kept thinking about those boot prints, the chair, the silence, and that feeling like we weren't alone. I started to wonder if someone had been watching us the whole time, staying just far enough out of view to not get caught. Maybe they were hiding in the woods, following us quietly. Maybe they wanted to scare us. Or maybe it was worse than that. The part that stuck with me most, though, was how careful everything seemed. That chair wasn't taken by an animal. It wasn't random. Someone came into our campsite during the night, took it, and placed the torn part far enough away that we wouldn't see it right away. Like they wanted us to know they'd been there without actually seeing them. We never reported it. What would we even say? No crime was committed. No one was hurt. Just a lot of weird, quiet signs that someone else was there with us, just outside our vision, waiting. We haven't been camping since. I still have the rest of the chair, the fabric part we found. I kept it in the garage for a while, thinking maybe I'd throw it away. But something about it made me keep it. It's up on a shelf now, folded and dusty. Every once in a while, I look at it and wonder who took it, why they left it behind like that, what they were planning, or if they were just playing some strange, silent game that we didn't know we were part of. And I'm just glad we left when we did. I was 24 that year, just out of a rough winter in Oslo, and in a weird place in life. I had no steady job, just part-time delivery gigs. My girlfriend had moved out of our shared apartment 3 weeks earlier, and most of my friends were either too busy or too far away to hang out. I had this feeling I needed to get out of the city for a while. Not for vacation, just to clear my head. Something quiet, alone. I remembered a place about 2 hours from the city, where my uncle used to take me as a kid. It was near the edge of a small village called Valen, by the woods. There was this old graveyard, completely forgotten, right in the middle of a clearing. It wasn't a big graveyard, just 30 or 40 graves, most of them from the early 1900s. Overgrown, cracked stones, rusted iron fencing. Last time I had seen it, it looked abandoned. I thought it would be the perfect place to be alone. Nobody would go out there, and it was surrounded by forest on all sides. I packed my tent, a sleeping bag, some food, my small gas burner, a water jug, flashlight, power bank, a knife, and my thermal jacket. I left on a Friday morning in late September. The train took me to the nearest stop, then I had to walk about 6 kilometers. The village was quiet, barely any shops. I grabbed some extra water and snacks there, then headed into the woods. It was cold for September. The air had that damp bite to it, like it had rained early in the morning. The sun was out, but it didn't do much to warm the forest. I followed a narrow path that wasn't really a trail anymore, just broken traces of old dirt where people used to walk. After about an hour, I saw the first signs of the graveyard. A piece of the old iron fence stuck out from under some moss, twisted and rusting. The whole area looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I was bigger now. Grass had grown wild over everything. Some headstones had sunk into the soil. Others were cracked down the middle. One had fallen and split into two pieces. The names on them were all in faded old script. Anderson, Johann, 1912, 1898, and so on. I walked around the edges of it, checking the layout. There were a few trees near the center, pine and birch, and a dry, open spot just outside the gate where I decided to pitch my tent. The sun was already dipping low when I finished setting up. I made a quick dinner, boiled pasta and canned meat, and sat on a rock eating while staring at the graveyard. I didn't feel scared, just quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing but the occasional rustle in the leaves. Around 7:30 p.m., the sun dropped behind the trees. It got cold fast. I zipped up my jacket and sat on the edge of my sleeping bag, reading something off my phone until the battery dropped below 30%. I turned it off, clicked on the flashlight, and decided to walk around a little more before getting in the tent. The air smelled like damp leaves and soil. My breath fogged up in front of me. As I stepped around the graves, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Near the far end of the cemetery, the ground sloped downward a bit, and there was what looked like a broken stone path leading away into thicker trees. I followed it a few meters, but it was hard to see with just the flashlight. After 20 or 30 feet, the stones disappeared into mud. I turned back and walked to my tent, zipped myself in, and lay down. The silence hit me hard. I could hear every creak in the forest, every twig cracking. Somewhere nearby, a fox screamed, sharp and sudden. I jolted up, heart thumping, stopped right away. I knew what it was, but being alone out there made it feel different. I lay back down and tried to sleep. I kept waking up. Every hour, sometimes from sounds, sometimes from the cold. At around 2:40 a.m., I woke to something else. A metallic clink, very faint, not close but not far either. I froze, listened, nothing. Then again, clink. I slowly unzipped the tent, pushed the flap open, and peeked out. It was pitch dark, except for the narrow beam of my flashlight. I swept it across the graveyard. Everything looked the same, but I saw something that made me sit still. One of the headstones that had been flat on the ground earlier now looked like it was standing upright. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe I hadn't looked at that exact one. I told myself it was nothing. I zipped the tent back up, but I didn't sleep again. By morning, the ground was wet from dew. I got out, walked over to the headstone. It was broken in half, standing part stuck at an angle. Probably shifted from the cold or something. But still, I was uneasy. I made coffee on my gas burner and warmed my hands on the mug. I decided to walk the path I'd found the night before, the one with the broken stones. I followed it deeper this time, past the muddy patch. It curved slightly and led to a clearing with the remains of what looked like an old cabin. Just the stone foundation was left. A few wooden beams were scattered nearby, half buried in moss. Inside the foundation was a pit, maybe 4 feet deep, full of leaves and broken glass. I didn't go in, just stood above it, flashlight scanning the inside. Something shiny caught my eye. I stepped down carefully and pulled it out, an old rusted padlock. Nearby was what looked like a crushed tin container.
No markings.
I climbed out and stood there, thinking. Why would a cabin be this close to a graveyard? Maybe the caretaker used to live here, or someone else. I walked back to my tent. That afternoon, I read, napped a little, then walked around the area again. Nothing strange happened, but at night, around 11 p.m., I heard a noise that didn't fit the forest. It was like someone dragging something heavy over grass. I shot up, grabbed my flashlight and knife, and crouched low inside the tent. The sound came from the side, near the graves. I unzipped the flap slowly. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I scanned the graves. Nothing. But then I saw it. Fresh dirt. Maybe 2 meters from the edge of the cemetery. Like something had been dug and filled in again. It hadn't been there before. I didn't sleep. I sat in the tent with my back against my bag, knife in hand. The sounds didn't come back. Just silence again. In the morning, I went straight to the patch of dirt. It was fresh.
No grass, no roots.
I poked it with a stick. The soil was soft. Something had definitely been dug there. I didn't want to dig it up myself, but I knew I couldn't ignore it either. I marked the spot with a stick and a piece of orange cloth from my tent bag, then packed up everything. I hiked back to the village, reached the small station, and called the local police from a payphone outside a grocery store. I didn't give them too many details, just said I found disturbed ground near old graves and thought they should look at it. They said someone would check. I didn't go back to Oslo right away. I stayed in a cheap hostel near the coast that night, trying to shake the feeling from my chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was unease, like I had been close to something I wasn't supposed to see. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was a man with a thick Norwegian accent saying they had investigated the graveyard and found evidence of recent digging. They were still looking into it, but thanked me for reporting it. Nothing more. I never heard anything else. No follow-up. No news reports. I didn't go camping again for over a year after that. When I did, I stayed close to other people. No more graveyards. No more forgotten paths. The thing that stuck with me wasn't the fear. It was the silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. And I still wonder sometimes, who was out there with me that night? And what were they digging? I was 31 the summer I decided to drive across southern France on my own. It was 2019, early June, and I'd just taken unpaid leave from work. I was burnt out, sick of my office job in Leeds, tired of seeing the same walls, the same rain, the same faces. I wanted something quiet, open, and far away. I had this used Renault Kangoo van I bought off a friend's uncle. I fitted a basic mattress in the back, a camping stove, some crates with canned food, and drove it through Dover into Calais. My plan was to move slowly south through the countryside, stopping at small towns, forests, and parks to sleep. I didn't want hotels. I didn't want people. Most nights I stayed at official campgrounds or quiet rest areas just outside towns. Sometimes I parked off back roads when it felt safe. I kept to the rules. Park late, leave early, and don't leave trash. I used offline maps, marked water sources, and made sure my phone was charged. I wasn't careless. I just wanted stillness. That's how I ended up near a village called Lorette, west of Montpellier, 3 weeks into the trip. Lorette wasn't on the map as anything notable. No tourist spots, no historic markers, no restaurants people blogged about. I found it because of a detour. I had meant to head toward Lodov but took a wrong turn at a junction with a broken road sign. The GPS rerouted me, and I followed an old D road through farmland and low hills until I passed a faded sign for Lorette 3 kilometers. I almost drove past it, but there was a flat clearing about half a kilometer past the sign, near a cluster of trees and a slow-running creek. The ground was dry but level. I parked the van under some shade. It was still light out, and I planned to make a quick dinner, read, and sleep early. There was no cell signal, but I wasn't worried. I had water and fuel, and the van was in good condition. I was used to being off the grid by then. It was warm. Cicadas buzzed in the grass. The creek ran quietly over smooth stones behind a thin curtain of trees. I boiled water for pasta, chopped some dried sausage, and ate leaning against the back door with my shoes off. Everything smelled like dry dirt and pine needles. I didn't see a house or a car the whole evening. I thought I'd found the perfect place to spend the night. By the time the sun started going down, the sky turned a soft peach, and I got out to brush my teeth and take a walk along the creek. I left the van unlocked. I didn't bring my phone or flashlight. The creek was maybe 30 meters from the van. Just a slow trickle over rocks, some frogs in the reeds. I walked up its bank for 5 minutes, following the way it curved slightly uphill and then widened into a deeper basin, almost like a shallow pool. There were smooth slabs of rock around it, worn down like people or animals used to rest there. I stood for a while and watched the water swirl slowly, and then I saw him. He was maybe 50 meters up the slope, half behind a thin tree, far enough that I couldn't see his face, but close enough that I knew he was watching me. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking or doing anything natural. He was just standing completely still, like a shadow pinned to the tree. I could make out the shape of his arms, the dark outline of pants and a jacket, something bulky around his waist like a pack or belt. I didn't panic. Not yet. I just turned around and started walking back the way I came. Not fast, but deliberate. I didn't look back. My heart started going faster. I knew he hadn't said anything. He hadn't moved. But the way he was standing, rigid, deliberate, out of place, it wasn't right. He was too far into the woods to just be wandering. And no one just stands like that. When I got back to the van, I shut the doors quietly and locked them. I sat in the driver's seat and listened. The sun had dipped low now, and the shadows were stretching across the clearing. I still didn't have service. I waited. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there, eyes on the rearview mirror, the side windows, the edge of the woods. Nothing happened for about half an hour. Then I saw something move at the far end of the clearing, just a blur between the trees, a darker shape shifting slightly. I held my breath. The van was locked, the engine off, and I was down in the seat. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he had gone back. I waited longer. Still nothing. But later that night, sometime after midnight, I don't know exactly when, I heard the crunch of footsteps on dry grass. Not an animal. Not wind. Slow human steps. Deliberate. Dragging slightly. I didn't breathe. I stayed perfectly still. I had a small utility knife in the crate behind the seat. I reached for it quietly. The footsteps circled the van once. I heard the faint brush of something against the back panel. Then silence. Then a soft thud near the rear door. I stayed awake the rest of the night, heart pounding so hard I felt sick. I didn't dare look out. I didn't want to show movement. I gripped the knife so tight my palm ached. By morning, the clearing was quiet again. I unlocked the door slowly and stepped out. My legs were shaking. There were footprints in the dirt, boot prints, large, going around the van once. A set stopped at the rear door and then walked off toward the tree line. I followed them 20 meters in, and they disappeared into the thicker undergrowth. That was enough. I wasn't going to stay another second. I packed everything fast, tossed my stove and mat back into the van without organizing anything, and started the engine. I didn't eat. I didn't brush my teeth. I didn't even change clothes. I drove straight back to the main road, taking turns without checking maps, just heading in the direction of light and open space until I reached a gas station with people, phones, and signal. I parked and sat there for almost 2 hours. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, after I'd already moved further south and stayed at a proper campground near Béziers, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I was reorganizing the crates in the back of the van, restocking from a supermarket run, and I noticed my water container was missing. Not empty, gone. I also noticed my old spare shoes, which I kept in a bin under the bed, were gone too. At first, I thought I had just forgotten them. Maybe I left them by the creek. But I never brought that crate out of the van. Then I saw a long, thin scratch down the inside of the rear door, right where the lock was. Not deep, but fresh. It wasn't there before Lorette. He had tried to get in. Maybe he even did. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know why he left. But I know he was real. I finished my trip early after that. I stayed in real campgrounds, places with other people, places with fences and streetlights. I cut the whole route short and crossed back to the UK 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I still have that van, parked at my mum's place in Yorkshire. I haven't slept in it since. I looked up Lorette when I got home. Nothing came up on Google. No population records. No photos. Just one blurry entry on an outdated map service from 2004. I even tried satellite view, just trees, fields, and an old road that looked more like a trail. Sometimes I wonder if he was from there, or maybe just passing through like me. But the way he stood, the way he watched, the way he circled the van, it wasn't random. He wasn't lost. He wasn't curious. He was waiting, and I'll never go back.